Week 7. Hey everyone, welcome to YouthTube Week 7. We're so happy you've joined us. This week we're going to hit pause on what we normally do, and we want to have a conversation about what's happening in our nation. And yeah, our nation is hurting, people are hurting, we are heartbroken ourselves. And so I just didn't want to keep doing what we're normally doing. We need to talk about what's going on. And so this week I was able to sit down and have a conversation through Zoom or Skype with our children's pastor, Pastor Inez. Pastor Inez is a great woman. I'm so happy that she is on staff at our church and that she ministers to the children in our church. And we were able to sit down and have a conversation about George Floyd and the current situation and what's going on and what we can do to be, as a youth, to be a part of the solution and learn why everything is happening. So here's our conversation. We hope that you enjoy and that you are impacted by the conversation between Pastor Inez and I. Enjoy.
Hey, well, good morning, Pastor Inez. Thank you.
Good morning.
For youth on Wednesday night.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I wanted to have a conversation with you. Our world is hurting. Our nation is hurting. And there have been several unfortunate events that have happened. And Inez, tonight or today, it's Tuesday morning while we're recording this, but we've been watching Wednesday night. I wanted to just take some time to kind of talk with you and have you share, as our children's pastor and a person of color, with what is going on. I had a conversation on Sunday with our youth students about George Floyd and the protests that have been happening and his death that happened. And our students were aware, they're hurting, they're broken, just as our nation is. And a lot of them are left with this question of like, what can I do? What do I do? How do I handle the situation? So I wanted to come to you and have a conversation with you about what are some things that our students could do. So before we have that conversation, could you just catch us up to speed, give us some insight on what is going on and with this current situation?
So yeah, a lot is going on, and but I think what has brought us to this place, and I'll try to be quick as possible. We see the protests and all these things going on, and it all is a result of George Floyd. You mentioned that, who was killed last week. And by a police officer, and it was videoed. And so that's why the outrage. And also just at the beginning of the month, a video had resurfaced from another man that was jogging and had been killed by two people in his neighborhood who deputized themselves to do so. And they took matters into their own hands. And so that was also recorded. And so why we're seeing why it's all this outrage, because this is not new. This is not just happening, all of a sudden. It's been happening, but now it's being filmed. Now we're seeing it on video, and people are outraged, and rightfully so, because it is a major injustice, and it's hard for people, and especially as Christians, I believe it should be anyway, like hard for us to see that and not be moved to action. And so people are being moved to action, but maybe we don't exactly know what to do. And so people are angry, and rightfully so. And again, this is not new, that people have been angry about this, but it's gone unheard for so long. And people have not listened, not believed, but now it's hard not to listen and believe when we see it on video. There have been others. Breonna Taylor is another one. that has come out. There was another one in San Leandro that I don't hear talked about very often. Stephen Taylor in a Walmart was having a mental health issue. And so, yeah, it's been happening, but now we're seeing it recorded, and people are angry, as we should be.
Yeah.
And as Christians, I want to say that we should be angry. I think sometimes we think as Christians it's not okay to be angry, but it is. That should make us angry to see something like that happen, and especially with without justice being served. And so it took a public outcry to get the men arrested in the Ahmaud Arbery case, the guy in Georgia that was running. I believe it took the public outcry for the police officer to be arrested as well in this case with George Floyd. So that's what's going on. That's why we're, and again, I believe like that, it's just seeing it. And now like we shouldn't have ignored it before, but now it's like, how can we ignore it? Like now, like you are making a conscious choice to ignore it because now there's proof.
Right.
We see it.
Right. Great. Thank you for that. Catching up to from what you're sharing, it reminded me of a conversation that I had with some of our students. Is a lot of our students are experiencing this heartbreak and sadness, sorrow, anger, but then also some of our students are confused. They don't know necessarily how to handle the situation. What is one way that our students who are feeling maybe a little confused or maybe don't have the ability to understand like how to empathize with people that are hurting and suffering or who have maybe experienced this directly? What is something that our students could do to grow in their ability to have empathy or to like sit with the people who are hurting right now?
I think that sometimes it's hard to empathize with people because we don't fully know what it's like. Maybe there's students that don't know what that's like or have never experienced that fear of having something like that happen to them because perhaps they're not, because of the color of their skin, I'll just say it like that. So I think it's hard to empathize when you don't understand it. So I think the first thing I would say is like, you don't have to understand it to have compassion for someone. Mm-hmm. Just to know that it's happening should move you to compassion. And I think that's what stops people sometimes and the confusion is because that's not your world, right? So it's confusing to you, like, how could this ever happen? Because that's not the world you live in. And I think a lot of our young people are probably in that place where it's confusing because that's not the experience that they've had. That's not how their relationship with law enforcement is, or their relationship is with people of another color. That's not their world. So it's hard to comprehend that world. And so, but again, like, we're seeing that this is fact. It's true, even though it's not your world, it is someone else's world. I'll just say it, like, for my son, that's his world. That will be his world. And as a mom, that's very scary to me to know that people that look like my son are 3 times more likely to be killed by police than your son.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
You don't have to understand that to empathize, right? Like, you can just say, like, that's not right. That is not right.
Yeah.
That could be Malachi, but most likely won't be Emmett. Right. That's not right. And so just to understand that, like, that's just justice. And then take it a step further. So, and I'm using Pastor Justin as an example here, but you can put yourself in any situation and say, like, because these are not just sons, they're brothers, they're uncles, they're dads. So then, okay, like, I don't understand it because that's not my world, but I know that it's happening. That's step 1. And step 2 is what if it were? And Justin, we had that conversation yesterday, right? Where you had expressed to me that you were moved to tears because you started thinking, you're looking at your own children and thinking, what if that was my children? Well, then that's where that empathy starts to come in, where we acknowledge, okay, that's not my world, but I know that that's their world. And then second, okay, but it could be like, what if that was my son? What if roles were reversed and my son was 3 times more likely to have, or whatever, like then you start to feel. So like, I think that we have this, like, we do it to protect ourselves. We don't allow ourselves to go, and I can identify with that because like I'm a very like, I don't always come across this way because it's my protection, but like I'm a very like, I'm a feeler, and so like I will you guys, this is a really old reference. I don't even know if Justin, if you know this movie, but like there's this movie Never Been Kissed with Drew Barrymore, and there's a scene where she goes to this guy. She's like, not a cool girl, I'll say it that way. And they call her Josie Grossi, and she's invited to prom by the coolest guy in class. And then so he comes to pick her up for prom. He pops his head out of the limo and he eggs her. And like when I saw that, and I was like, I don't know, I was not a kid when I saw it. I was a young adult, college student, and I just like cried and cried. And my friend was like, what is wrong with you? And I was like, I feel so bad for her. Like, so like for me, I have to like often turn off that part of me because I feel people's pain so much that it's painful to me. And that's like a silly example, but that's how much I feel. And so I think a lot of people do that though. We turn it off because it's too painful to think about. We can't turn this off. Turning it off, I believe, is in part, it's hate, yes, but I think there's a lot of other people that aren't in the hate side. They've just turned it off because they can. We've talked about this too, right, Justin? Like you can ignore it. I cannot, but right. You can. And so don't turn it off. Don't turn off that empathy. Yes, it's painful. Yeah, you might cry, but like I feel like that's so necessary if we're actually going to see change. Right. And what I think that like this generation, you guys that are watching this, like I believe wholeheartedly that you guys can change this because you are a generation that has that compassion. You are a generation that has that anger. You are a generation that knows this is not right and that has a heart for justice. So don't turn it off. It might be painful, but don't turn it off.
Right. That's good. Thank you, Nez. Yeah, that was really good. I appreciate like the thought of that understanding doesn't have to come for compassion. Like compassion can come simply from seeing like, hey, like people are hurting, and I can be compassionate towards that. And as we step into that, step into the things that are uncomfortable, our ability to empathize and our ability to grow in compassion towards others happens. And we grow in those areas. So that's really good. So as we grow in compassion, as we grow in empathy, what could be something that a young person could do to take steps towards action for justice? Like what is a practical way that they could help justice come and like people be treated fairly and treated as a person should be treated?
There's 2 ways that we can say this. One, I'll use the biblical way first. Love your neighbor. That's in the Bible. And I think that's something we don't. I was thinking about this today or maybe the other day. We hear that story from the Bible, the parable that Jesus told about when someone asked, well, who's my neighbor? And then, he says to love your neighbor as yourself. What we don't talk about, I don't remember talking about this as a kid growing up in church. And I certainly, like, as a children's pastor, I will say, like, I don't know that I've fully told this part either, is that, and how many times have I told this story? The Samaritans, we know, like, the Jews didn't like the Samaritans. What we don't talk about is that it was a racial thing, that it was because of their ethnicity, that they
Right.
weren't a quote unquote pure breed as the Jews were. That's why they hated them. And then from that also stemmed the religious aspect. They practiced, they were Jews, but they had other things as well. So it was the ethnicity and the religious things, and they literally hated them. But Jesus said, love your neighbor. And he used the Samaritan as an example, not as, this is also very interesting, not as the person to do the loving, to be loved, but the person that was doing the loving, that was the loving neighbor, was actually the person that was looked down on. And so to me, that says that everyone, it doesn't matter who you are or what you've been through, everyone should love their neighbors. Everybody. And so that's step one. And it sounds like maybe that's not very practical, but it really is. That if we get into the practice of loving our neighbors, and that's who we are, and that's what we do, part of loving our neighbors is speaking out and saying that this is wrong. Part of loving our neighbors is saying, I don't understand, but I stand with you, and this is wrong, and I'm not afraid to say this is wrong. For young people, it looks a little different because maybe you don't have there's certain things that as adults that we can do that perhaps you cannot do. But 1,000,000% you can stand up and say, this is wrong.
Right.
That's not wrong. That's not right. And it may require you to stand up to adults and say, that's not right. I think back to when I was a kid, and I want to be clear, it's not my parents, but like, I remember being around adults that were saying things, and I was like, then now I look back and I think, oh my goodness, I can't believe that they said that. That was so wrong. And so you as a kid can stand up to adults and say, you know what, that's not right. That's wrong. And so, and then in this specific case, that we're talking about, the same situation with the Samaritans and the Jews, right? Like there was that hatred because of their ethnicity. And that's what we see still today, all these years later, right? And so there's a term that I use in my life that I want to be anti-racist, that it's not enough just to not be, just to say that I'm not. And so like part of that is, and I is standing up and just saying that's not right. That's not okay. And for students, I think a lot of it is just like not allowing, and it's of anything, any person that maybe is in, we call it a marginalized group. I don't know if you guys have heard that, but someone who's like, you could call it just like on the outsides. It could be a student at school that is picked on because of maybe they have a physical disability or something, or they're just different, or they're the nerd, or whatever you want to call them, like the outcasts. It applies in so many different areas of our lives where it's not enough just to say, well, like, I don't think that's right. We have to actually say that's not right. It's not right to treat that student that way, and actually live that way, and not just, well, I don't do that, but other people do that, but I don't do that. I don't think it's okay. No, we have to stop. And if we're going to stop this kind of tragedy from happening, it's going to take everybody to choose to stand up and call it out and say it's not okay, and challenge people. So when your friends are making jokes that are making fun of somebody from another ethnicity, or again, making fun of the kid with the disability or whatever it is, it's not enough just to be quiet and feel uncomfortable and not participate. You have to call it out and say, that's not okay.
Yeah, that's good. I think that's the most practical way to start, like standing up for injustice. Injustice happens all over the place in every aspect of life, not just in the situation of like police brutality, but like it happens at school, it happens, you know, in their neighborhoods, it happens like everywhere. And so, yeah, to be people that stand up for what is right, and call out what is wrong, that's good. That's good. I think that's the best way that we can start doing that. And I love that. Yeah, thank you, Inez, just for your time, and who you are and what you stand for and what you believe in. I'm so grateful that we get to work together. We get to serve people together alongside one another. It's really fun. And so, yeah, I don't know, just a takeaway that I have from what we talked about is, as Christ's followers, we have to remember that Jesus was a person who intentionally stepped into uncomfortable situations so that God's love could be elevated, glorified, and brought to people who may not be experiencing it. And so we, as a community of like-minded believers, my prayer is that we can step into those situations, so we can be vessels of God's love towards all people, here in Tracy, and as our students move on to other chapters of their life, in our state, in our nation, and hopefully our world as well. So let me just close in a time of prayer. I'm super grateful for you taking some time this morning to have this conversation with me. And I am very happy that our kids get to hear it later on Wednesday. So let me just pray. Dear Lord, thank you for who you are. God, thank you that Inez and I had the opportunity to have this conversation. Lord, I just pray for everyone that is hurting and heartbroken. Lord, would you comfort them? God, would your love just be spoken through us? Would you use us to love our neighbors? God, help us understand what that looks like. Would we remember, learn, and know that our neighbor is everyone? It's not just the people we live next to in our cul-de-sac or on our street, but God, it is everyone that we come in contact with, Lord, and that we would be able to love those people. God, would these words that have been spoken today not just be heard, but God, would we be moved to action? God, would we be moved to action to further your kingdom? So God, we thank you. And Lord, would you just heal our nation? And would you comfort the ones that are hurting? And in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Inez, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Of course. We'll talk to you later.
Okay. Bye.